Today's presentation is going to be about PDF accessibility basics. I'll be covering field types and tooltips and a bunch of other stuff as well. So my name is Rachel Reeves. I'll be doing today's presentation. I'm a project manager here at Access Ingenuity on the digital accessibility team. For reference, it is June 2026. So I'll be sharing Adobe and I'm on a PC today. So what you'll be seeing is relevant as of today's latest updates. So that could impact what we see and how things work since there's always updates coming. If you are new to our webinars, just a little bit about Access Ingenuity. So we've been working on digital accessibility since 2002. Our mission is to empower individuals with disabilities to live independently by providing access to digital content through assistive technology. We want to support organizations in making their digital materials, so that's documents, websites, online learning, fully accessible to all. And we want to deliver solutions through assistive technology, hands-on training, accessibility testing, document and website remediation, and support and compliance monitoring. So we're really here for all steps of the accessibility process. So with that, I'm going to pull up a PDF that I've created for today's presentation. This will also end up into our chat, so you can follow along or look at it later. So a few settings before we dive into all of the details. So Acrobat, there are a couple settings that impact the way your forms will look on the page. So if you are in Acrobat, you'll go to the Edit menu and then down to Preferences. And then there is the General Preferences. That'll pop up and you'll have the option for Forms. And under Forms, there's this option to show border hover color for fields. And so that's a checkbox. So I would definitely recommend it being checked. And if you have it checked, then you get to choose what your field highlight colors are and also what the color of your required forms are. It kind of defaults to this light blue purple color. So if your screen does not look like mine, once I start adding forms, it could be because of the settings right here or a color you selected. Which is something to keep in mind is that this is outside of your control. So it's dependent on like a personal computer. So someone could come in here and change their highlight color to something that does maybe not have great color contrast. So that's just something to keep in mind, that it's kind of outside of our control what that highlight color is. If you leave it as this default color, usually it has pretty good contrast, which I just accidentally changed it to a darker blue, which ironically, the default color was not one of the options. So let me create something similar to the default color. And then there's also additional checkboxes up on top here under the general section. And there is, second from the bottom, this checkbox to automatically detect form fields. And you will want that checked for most of what we work on today. There might be some situations where you decide to uncheck it, but for most of the work that comes across my plate, I always am having automatic form field detection. So I'm going to leave that checked and then exit out of these preferences. So those are a couple of the settings that you need. I'm assuming most of those in attendance today have watched some of our other presentations, so you know that we'll be in the tags tree, which is on that left-hand side. We may also use the order on the left side, as well as content. And then on the right-hand side, you're going to want the prepare form tool. So if you don't see it there, you can do more tools and then add prepare form. So we're going to be doing a lot within the prepare form. So those are kind of the layout that you're going to need in Acrobat Pro. Just in case someone hasn't been here for past webinars, a few things to note is that I am in the paid version of Acrobat. So this is why I can edit the documents, add in forms. So you have to have the Acrobat Pro in order to do this. And then probably if you've been here before, you know that I am not a fan of the new Acrobat. So there is this option to enable the new Acrobat view, which changes where things are located. So I am showing you today's presentation in the older Acrobat view. If you want to test, you can go back and forth. So if under the view menu, there's the option to enable new Acrobat. Both should have the same functionalities. The buttons are just located in different places. So with that, a few of the general steps of making forms accessible. Step one would be you want to create your source document for success. So if you've been with us before, we sometimes talk about how to make your MS Word file more accessible. And you can also make it set up for forms a little easier. Or if you're working in InDesign, you can add the forms right into InDesign and do a good chunk of the accessibility in your InDesign. And then we're going to convert it to PDF. And then inside of Acrobat Pro, we're going to add the form fields. So typically we're going to do an Acrobat auto detect form fields, which I'll show in a second here. And then once the form fields have been added, we're going to make sure that all of our form fields are accessible. And then we want to make the entire document accessible, which we'll touch on a few aspects of that today, but we're not going to dive into how to make the document entirely accessible because that takes multiple webinars to cover. And then my step 6 is something that may not apply to all documents, but if you have a digital ID that people are signing, it's important that you sign the document after you've made it accessible. So we do run into issues where we receive signed documents and we're asked to make it accessible. And the answer is we can't, because once it's signed, it's locked and I'm not able to go in and make it accessible. So we always want to make sure we're making it accessible before we do any of the signing. So with that, I'm going to show you how to do the auto detect forms. So we're going to do that prepare form option, which is located on my right-hand side. It's the prepare form tool. And since it's the first time I have clicked on this for this file, it's going to give me a pop-up that says to begin, select a file, scan a document, or start from scratch. And so it's asking me, do I want to auto detect? And it does say that my form field auto detection is on. It does give you the option to change that right there, which is going to bring up that preferences that we were in before. So I showed it pops it up. And so if needed, you could check it if it wasn't checked. And then I'm just going to push start and it's going to do its thing and it's added a bunch of form fields. And then you'll notice that now my prepare forms tool on the right has a lot more options. So I have some things up on the top that let me align, center, match size, distribute. There's a few menu items, and then there's each of the pages has a drop down with all of the forms that have been added to the pages. So that's the first step. We're going to go through and double check everything that has been auto-populated. Sometimes it does a great job and sometimes it does a terrible job. So it depends on how your file was laid out, how it visually looked as well. And so a few reminders for general form creation. So we want to make sure that you're always using clear and specific visual form labels for every form. That's also going to help it populate better. You never want a form floating off on its own. Everything has to have a label that clearly tells you what that form is for. And then we want to make sure that you are visually including any specific formatting requirements in the visual form label, which I'll show you an example of that on the next page. So I have today's date as one of my forms, and then in parentheses, I've included mm/dd/YYYYY. End parentheses. And so that is what I mean by including, if you have a specific formatting you're looking for, we need to include it in the visual label. So we want to make sure we're always doing that. And then the other thing to note is that you just need to make sure you're always including enough space for a response. So there are a lot of times we get a form and I think, man, this would take a couple sentences to answer and there's room for a few words. And so making sure before you convert it to PDF, you've created enough space for that response. So now that I have the forms open, we'll dive into how to play around with these forms. So you'll see that I have the prepare form toolbar on the right-hand side, and then it's also created this taskbar up on the top, which you can close out of, which means that it'll close all of your prepare form. So I'm going to open that back up, and this is where you can get to details on the form. So the first thing we're going to look into is our form properties. So you have to have the toolbar open in order to get to this, and you can right-click on any of the forms and go to properties, and it'll pop up the dialog box. Or you can double-click, and it'll pop up the dialog box. Or you can use on the left-hand side here, you can also right-click and get to properties from there. So there's a couple different ways to get to those properties. And then inside of the properties, there's a few really, really key elements. So I'm going to pull up this today's date box and put it off to the side here. And so the first tab is general. And this is going to have a name and a tooltip. And so Every single form is going to have a name and a tooltip. You'll see that it auto-populated. It took its best guess at what the name and the tooltip is. And so for this example, today's date in the name, it typically removes all of the symbols. So even though visually I have today's date with an apostrophe for today's, and then I have parentheses, MM/DD/YYYY, the name has auto-populated to remove the apostrophe, remove the parentheses, and remove the slashes, which we are okay with because we've noticed that the symbols definitely create corruption sometimes. So Adobe is removing them on purpose. So we want to make sure that we're not adding in any crazy symbols here to the name. Each form does need a unique name, which when we auto detect, Acrobat is doing that on its own. So it's deciding, it's giving things unique names. There is a small chance it might not do that 100% of the time. So if you have two forms that are both named first name or two forms that are date, one, I would discourage you from having multiple forms that are named the exact same thing, but I'm not confident that Acrobat would name them differently every single time. So that is something we want to make sure we're checking for. Because if two forms have the exact same name, they're going to be connected. So I'm going to show you just as an example, I'm going to rename this form. I'm just going to name it test. And then I'm going to close out and I'm going to name this next form I have. So right under today's date, I have VIP information as a heading where I have first name, middle name, and last name. So I'm opening first name and I'm going to also name it test. Now I'm going to close out and I'm going to just close out of the view so that we can interact with these forms. As now I'm going to, in today's date, I'm going to type. And you'll see that after I typed, it has populated the exact same text into both the first name form field and the today's date form field. And that is because we named them the same thing. So this is why every form gets its own name. That means that it won't populate into both of the forms. So I'm going to go ahead back to first name and I'm going to change this back. So I'm going to change the name to first name and then I'm going to update the tooltip. And so the name is important, but I'd almost argue the more important thing is the tooltip. So the name populates into our tags tree and it populates into error messages. But the tooltip is what gets read to the screen reader. So the tooltip is really, really important to be accurate and to be true to what the form is. So there are times where your name may just be, you may just have numbers that say oh 01. That's not wrong. It could be a number, or sometimes there's a specific code that users need in order for the forms to populate the responses into a third-party system. So that name field can really be a lot of different things, but the tooltip is very specific. It must match the visual form name, and it must include any special formatting requirements. So for this field, I'm going to call it first name. And then you'll see that I also have an asterisk that's after first name. And above where I've started these pretend forms, I put an asterisk and said required forms. So this asterisk or star is how it'll read with JAWS for most times, is going to identify that it is a required field. And so it is very important that I include that in my tooltip so that users know that they've entered a required field. So that's very important to include in the tooltip. So I've added the tooltip to first name. I'm going to go ahead and open today's date again, and I'm going to change it from my name back to today's date. And then you'll see that the tooltip that was auto-populated, it dropped a parentheses. And this is really common with auto-detect that it'll drop the last punctuation. And so I'm going to add that back in. And then today's date also needs that asterisk because it is the required form. So I've added that asterisk back in. You'll see that I do have colons at the end of all of my labels. We don't consider the colon a requirement into the tooltip. That's extra gibberish for someone to hear. So you don't have to add the colons, but the actual information does have to match exactly what you have there. And so then inside of our forms, depending upon what type of form you've had. So currently I've only shown text forms, but of course there's radio buttons and check boxes and digital ID signatures. There's lots of options. And so the properties will change based on the type of form you're editing, but every single one will have the name and tooltip in this general section. It will also have this required and read-only options. And so for this one, today's date is required. So I am going to check it as required, which means that if someone, they could be alerted, depending upon how your document's working, that like, hey, this is required. And then it also will change visually what's happening. So I'm going to close out. And now you can see that my required field has this red outline on it, which again, we need to keep in mind, not everyone's going to be able to see or interact with that red in the same way. So it's very important that we're using a visual identifier like that asterisk so that everybody knows it is a required form. But that required check mark is what makes it change color there. Other things in the properties, we've got different appearance options. So you could, if you want your forms to have a border or a fill, or you want it to be a specific size or font that gets typed in, you can change all of that. Again, I would hesitate if you're changing text color or fill color to remember that you're always passing color contrast requirements. There's different options for like where you want the form to be on the page. And then you also have options of default text. So if you always want a specific text to be in it, but you want users to be able to delete it and then add their own, you can use this. You have the option to have spelling or not spelling, and you can have multiple lines. There's character limits and combs. So I'll scroll down and show you what a comb field is. So here I have employee ID, which it auto detected that this is a comb of 10 characters. And so this you can type in here now, and it's going to space them out. So visually, I have 10 little boxes. And so it's put a character inside of each of those boxes. And so that's what the comb setting is. So depending upon what you're filling out, you may want to change it to comb. You may want to change it to a specific amount of characters. So you could say you want to require it to be 3 characters. You want to limit the number of characters. There's lots of different settings inside of there. And then, of course, it can get more complicated where you can add JavaScripts or make forms do certain things or make forms disappear. If you click yes, then 3 forms show. If you click no, then a different 3 forms show. So there's definitely more complex things you can do. But for today, we're just going to stick to the basics. If you do have checkboxes, so I'm going to go back up to our first page where it's auto-detected checkboxes for each of those steps of the process. And so you can change what that checkbox looks like. So I'll change each of these to the different options. So there's 6 steps, and I'm going to make all of them different. And so now if I close out and fill out these forms, you're going to be able to see the different types of ways to check it. On step 3, I've used this X or a cross. We prefer that one on our team. It's the most obvious and visual, so we think that it definitely helps low vision users. So that would be our preference, but technically none of these are wrong or incorrect. They're all check boxes. And so same thing with radio buttons. You'll be able to change it to all of these. And so it is important to know the difference between a radio button and a checkbox. The radio buttons, you can select one. So I have scrolled to my page 3, which has more silly forms I've created. And so the first question is, what is your preferred M&Ms? And then in parentheses, I've put select one. And so you can choose from peanut M&Ms, dark chocolate M&Ms, milk chocolate M&Ms, mini M&Ms, or no M&Ms are the options. And so you can see it is functioning where I can only select one of the options for the first 3. And visually, I've set this up as 2 columns. So the first 3 options are in the first column, and then the 2 are on the second column. And you'll see currently it's not functioning the way it should. So I was able to select one option between peanut, dark, and milk chocolate M&Ms, and then it's letting me select both mini M&Ms and no M&Ms. And so I'm going to open that prepare form and find these in my little tool here on the right-hand side. And so you can see that these little circles are radio buttons. And so there's an expand and collapse option to see the options associated with this radio button versus the mini M&Ms and no M&Ms have auto detected as checkboxes. And so that's why I'm able to select more than I should be able to select. And so we're going to have to go through and edit this to make it so that you can only select one of the 5 choices and make them all into radio buttons. And so I'll actually demonstrate that right now. That's probably the most helpful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete these incorrect checkboxes. Unfortunately, Acrobat, there's no option for me to have a form that's a checkbox or a text box and change it to a new type of form. You have to start from scratch. Maybe one day an update will let us easily do that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just copy 2 of my radio buttons I already have. And so I've used Control on my keyboard in order to copy 2 radio buttons at the same time. I'm going to right click and do copy. You could also use keyboard shortcuts, and then I'm going to paste. And then I'm going to drag and drop these to my second column that had missing items. And so now you see on my right-hand side, there is now 5 options under preferred drink options, which is actually my next question. So the auto detect did not do a great job of deciding what the label for these forms are. So I'm going to have to fix that. So I'm going to double click into my peanut M&Ms and I'm going to change its name preferred drink options. I'm going to call it preferred M&Ms, and I'm going to drop the and in the M&Ms because it's a special character and I don't want it to cause any corruption. But in my tooltip, which is what is read to the screen reader, I can include the and in M&Ms, and I'm going to also include the words select one because that's what my instructions say. And now to save myself some time, I'm going to copy the name so it's on my clipboard because by changing the name, I have split it into different groups of radio buttons. So right now, my preferred M&Ms group just has peanut M&Ms, and then the other ones are still under that preferred drink option. So I'm going to open each of these and change the name to preferred M&Ms, which is going to make them get associated with each other. So now all of these 5 are under the same radio button. And then for radio buttons, there's kind of a second step that doesn't exist for other forms, and that's under options. There's this radio button choice. So for a radio button, everything is named the same thing, but then inside of that, you have multiple options. And so you need to make sure that your options are also labeled correctly. So this one should be no M&Ms. This one should be mini M&Ms. And you'll see that it auto-detected some of them correctly, but it did drop some of my punctuation. So for these other ones, I need to add back in my punctuation. Also, my other beef with Acrobat is how tiny this radio button text box is. So there are times where I will actually type it out in like a different program and then copy and paste in here because this is so small. So now if I close out of my form edit view, you can see that I am only allowed to select one of the 5 options under preferred M&Ms. Right above that is a question that's called, will you be attending the VIP party? And this is a yes/no question. And so this is again going to be a radio button where you're only allowed to select one. And if I look at these ones, you'll see that it says options yes and option no. And so I think that Adobe thought that most radio buttons would be simple yes, no, maybe questions. And so that's why there's not much space here for that box. And so here I'm going to check my tooltips again. My tooltip has dropped the question mark, which I'm going to add in, and it's also dropped the asterisk for required field. So I'm going to add that in as well. And so there's all of these options that will vary depending upon your document. And then there's also formatting that's very specific. So for this today's date form, I have visually put in that I want it to be 2 digits for month, 2 digits for the day, and 4 digits for the year. And under format, I can make it require this. So there's under the format option, there's the date option. And then here I could choose that I want it to be required to be this specific formatting. If you are using this dropdown and selecting a format category, that means 100% of the time your tooltip needs more information. So you can never add specific formatting without having your tooltip let users know what that formatting is. And that's because it's a WCAG requirement that we essentially set people up for success. So now that my today's date has a specific formatting, if I typed in SD, which is not the correct formatting, and I've gotten a pop-up warning that says this is invalid date time, please make sure that the date time exists in the field today's date, which today's date is pulling from what I called the form. And it should match the formatting mm/dd/yyyy. So that's what the window says. And so we need to make sure that no one gets a pop-up window that they weren't expecting. So we always want to tell them any information they need to know up front to avoid the pop-up showing for them. So that's why we're going to include the MMDDYYYY visually as well as in the tooltip so that everyone knows how to set themselves up for success. A few other things to note is you can, under prepare form, you can edit and align things all together. So say you visually didn't like the size of your checkboxes. So I wanted my checkbox to be bigger. I can actually select all of my checkboxes and either right click and use these align and distribute or set fields to the same size, or that also exists up here in the right-hand corner. So you can say you want them to match size. And now it's automatically made them all the same size. You could also align them. So there's a lot of different options here. And you can also, I've selected multiple at once. So you can do that by control clicking on multiple, or you can also do control shift. So I control click on the bottom one and then held my shift key, clicked on the top, and it selected all of them in between, which makes it easy to like move them at the same time. Or you can change the properties and say, I want all of these to be the cross check mark. And so you can mass edit them. This is also really helpful in text boxes. So you can change your formatting of text boxes. So maybe I have these 3 text boxes for first name, middle name, last name, and I want them all to be a different size. So I did Control Shift to select all 3 of them, went to properties, and now I can change the appearance and say, I want them all to be Arial font, which there's actually, that's probably what they were. And I want them all to be size 14. And so then you can edit them all at once. So there's tons of different options here. So that's just a tip that will make your life a lot easier. You can mass edit forms all at once. So with that, I have a few other sample forms that I've done here. So there's a preferred drink options, which I've added in parentheses, select all that apply. So you can select flavored sparkling water, lemonade, Coca-Cola, and Pepsi for which ones you like. And so there's lots of options there. And then I also included this example here where it says rank your preferred volunteer schedule. So that's the heading. And then the little instructions underneath it is 1 being your first choice and 3 being your last choice. And so I have 3 text boxes here. And so these text boxes are right to the left of 3 options. And so I've included in my options a bolded word. That's the quick label. So there's the morning shift, that's bold, the evening shift, and then the midday shift. So those are the 3 options, and those are bold. And then right next to it are a couple sentences describing the morning shift. And I made this tedious on purpose because there's definitely times where you have 3 options or you have things and you have to describe them in detail, but it's a mouthful. So I've said workday 1, it's 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. Day 2, it's 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Day 3 is 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Day 4 is 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. Optional day 4 volunteer party begins at 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. And then I've done the same for evening shift, made up a whole schedule, and then midday shift as well. And so we do need to give these forms tooltips. And currently the tooltip is doing a classic Adobe thing where it's only pulled that first line. So it's morning shift workday 1, 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. Day 2, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Day 3, 8, and then it stopped. So the second line is where it says AM. And so there's a lot of information here. And so for this tooltip, I'm actually going to take away all of the extra information and just call it morning shift. And so this just makes it a lot more easy to digest. And so it is okay to sometimes shorten your tooltips to be like a concise option. In a dream world, you're only ever doing that in this type of situation where there's a bold label that the author has intentionally made, like, hey, this is what I want to call this form and this tooltip. This is the short word for it. And then you don't have to include that big explanation. So I'm going to do the same for midday shift. We're just going to call it midday shift and get rid of all of the extra gibberish. And then personally, I think it's funny how big these numbers are showing up. So I'm going to select these three and go to properties and make them show up as size 12 so that they match better. And they are bigger than the other ones. So I may decide, oh, I want these to be shorter. And then, oh, I want them all to match the same size. So I'm going to set them to the same height. And then I'm going to drag these. The height changed, and so the placement changed. And so I'm going to drag them down just a bit. And so I think visually that's more appealing, which there's a lot of stuff in forms where it's a choose your own adventure, personal preference. You can decide how you want them to look or what size you want it to look. The hard accessibility rules are just making sure that those tooltips are accurate, which you will notice I can hover over my forms and you are going to see the tooltip pop up. So that is another way to double check your work is to hover for these tooltips. Right after my preferred volunteer schedule, I have a little table where I have contact information for phone number, address, city, state, zip, email address. Again, there's tons of options that you could set. So for phone number, you could go in and format it and say that you need a phone number and you want it to include the area code. So if you are requiring an area code, you do need to let the user know that. You could say it's X of digits or include area code, but it's really important that you include that information up front. So since my text just says phone number, I'm going to leave this as none and not make it a special requirement. And the same thing with zip, there is the option to do a zip code with those additional 4 characters, which I wouldn't be able to tell you my additional 4 characters. So hopefully people aren't using that. But if you were using it, super important that you tell them up front. And so again, I'm not going to do anything with that because mine just says zip. And so I didn't give any information, so I should not add a formatting requirement. I also next have 2 examples of comment boxes. So I'm going to close out so I can type into these so you can see what they look like. Actually, I'm going to do test. I'm typing the word test a bunch of times. I'm going to copy and paste it so you can see. So this first comment box is currently 4 lines long. If I keep pasting, the text is going to keep shrinking. And so this is where I mentioned making sure you have enough space. So if you think someone's going to comment several paragraphs, this text is getting really tiny. So it just keeps shrinking as you go, which is a setting that you can change, but it's something to really keep in mind that you're always giving enough space. And then my second comment version has, instead of 1 box, I've created these lines. And so these lines are really not user-friendly. I'm going to move these out of the way. So you'll see in the background, when I was in my MS Word file, I made multiple lines for someone to fill out. And this makes it really difficult for someone to actually complete a sentence. And so we would not recommend multiple lines because then your tooltips even have to say, this is line 1. You have to tell someone, okay, now you're on to line 2. And it would be very difficult to use. And so something to think about when you're creating your forms is if you want to have that stuff in the background. So I'm going to delete these extra lines and just make this first one really big. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to say I want it to be multi-line. So now I have this multi-line over my lines that I added in my MS Word file. But you're going to see this is also very difficult to read because my lines start to cross out the text. So we can't do that either. So if you're making comments or something that has fillable lines that people are supposed to put in, this is where you may want to use your fill color and change it to white, which is going to cover the lines you put in the background. So that is one workaround. So I would always encourage that. And then the shrinking text is happening because the font size is auto. If I set this to size 14, then you'll see that it popped up a plus sign that says, hey, you've typed in more than what's visually there. And under options, you can allow this by saying you want to scroll long text. And so what's going to happen is I can scroll through this text, or you can use your keyboard to go up and down. So it is keyboard accessible. It's just not common because people are often printing forms. So if you print a form and you're allowing it to scroll for a text box, not all the content that someone has typed into their text box is going to make it to a printed version. So this is again where I strongly recommend making sure you have given enough space for what you think someone will respond with. Underneath these comments, I have another section that's labeled emergency contact information with the instructions, please list a minimum of one contact. And then I have a table where I have 4 columns, contact priority, contact name, relationship, and phone number. And then I have 4 rows that are just labeled 1, 2, 3, 4. And so this is where you could type in, it's text boxes inside of a table. So I'll show you what this looks like in the takes tree. And then I have that employee ID, and then we also have a signature, which if you are using the digital ID, you have to add that yourself. And so this is going to be, you can add a form here. And then you have to give it a tooltip and then make sure your name is accurate as well. You can also add all sorts of forms. So if you decide, oh, something was missing, you can add radio buttons, you can add your text boxes, you can add your calendar drop downs, which I should say the calendar drop down is the only one that is technically a text box. So you can decide that you don't want any formatting, and then it becomes the same as the text box button. So those are the only 2 that are interchangeable. There are drop downs you can use. So this is where you would have it come down and select. And so you can always add more forms if auto-populate didn't do it, or if for some reason you want to start from scratch and not use auto-populate, that's how you would do it. Okay, so that is formatting of the forms. Now we have to actually put them into the tags tree so they are read correctly. Okay, so I think I touched on a majority of the formatting. Again, a lot of it's personal preference, but once you have all of your formatting done, everything looks good. Now I would save your file so you don't lose anything, and then decide, okay, I need to add these to the tags tree. And so I will save this as an example since that's what I said. So here we're going to say my formatting is done. I've resaved my file, and now you have the option to approach it in a couple different ways. So you could auto tag the document, which is going to add in all of the forms to your tags tree, but then your tags tree may look a little different. So I've gone through the work of making this accessible from the beginning, which I wouldn't necessarily do every time, but I did it so you could have it in chat. So maybe you've already done a lot of work for accessibility, or you worked really hard in making the headings correct from your MS Word file. So you may not want to auto tag it. If that's the case, then you have to manually add all of these forms to your tags tree. So currently I went to my page 1. You'll see that I'm on the list of the 6 steps, and there's nothing about a form there. If I run my accessibility checker, I'm going to get a bunch of errors saying, hey, you have all of these forms that are not tagged. So it's giving me 41 errors for forms. And then it's also giving me errors for any forms that are missing a tooltip or a field description. And so those are being flagged as well. And so we need to add these all to the tags tree in order for it to be accessible. And so if I want to do this manually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on the tags tree where I want to find it, or use your menu. You don't necessarily have to right click. You could just get to the menu using like the menu key. And then you're going to do find. This is going to make a dialog box that says, what do you want to find? And the answer is annotations. So Adobe's calling our forms annotations. And so you can search the whole document, or you can search the page. I personally always go page by page just so it's a little bit more manageable. And you can push find, and now you'll see that it's highlighted my first form field. So you can do tag element. And then it's going to move on to the second form field, choose your own adventure if you want to just tag them one by one. I personally usually tag them all at once. So I've tagged all 6 that are on this first page, and then I just move them as needed. I find that to be a little bit quicker. What it's tagged for those annotations is the OBJR in my tags tree. And so you're going to see that the tags tree says the name of the form. So this name here, step 1, create source document for success, is what you're seeing in the tags tree. And then it just has this OBJ afterwards, which is what it calls the actual form. And so we need to make sure that every one of these OBJRs is nested inside of a form tag. So since we're doing this manually, we have to create a bunch of form tags. So I just right clicked, went to the new tag, and I'm going to type in form, or you could use the drop down to get to form. I'm going to have to do this a bunch of times for this file. And so I'm right clicking new tag, okay, right clicking new tag, okay. And I'm going to create 6 of them here. And then each of these steps has to go into their own form tag. So every single form OBJR belongs in its own form tag. So now I've put every single one of my OBJRs into a form tag, but now they're not in the right spot. So now I have to relocate them as well. So if we're doing this manually, it's a lot of work. Sometimes auto tagging is faster, sometimes it's not. So I'm going to finish this and then I'll show you what it looked like with auto tagging. And so this originally was a list, but since we're using forms instead, we're going to actually pull this out of the list format. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open my list structure. I'm going to take all of my L bodies and I'm going to change these to P tags. So they're going to get updated to P tags. They're all still selected. Oh, just kidding. That didn't work. What did I do wrong? I think I clicked something on my keyboard without realizing it. So we're going to select them all again. Right click. Oh, I did new tag. I meant to go to properties. I was talking too much. Okay, so I selected them all, went to properties instead of new tag, and then I'm going to change them all to P. And so now they've all changed to P. They're all still selected. I'm going to pull them outside of my list. So now I have my P tags right here. And then my list just contains these little dots, which are the checkboxes. And so I'm actually going to artifact them all. Here's a little hot tip where we want to artifact everything that's inside of this list. So I'm actually going to use create tag from selection to combine everything into one place. And then I'm going to artifact them all at once, which it didn't actually change tag to artifact. Okay, great. And so now I have all of these forms that I now just have to relocate into the correct places. So I'm going to drag and drop these forms to where they belong. And so now you can see I have the right structure. So all of these P tags now are correct. So there's 6 P tags. Every P tag starts with the container of the label of the form, and then it follows by a form tag with the OBJR inside of it. And so this is our requirement for our form structure inside of the tags tree. So each form has to have a link OBJR. Each link OBJR has to be inside of a form tag, and the form tag should always come after the text or the container that is labeled because we always want to hear what the form is before we get into the form. And then it's usually always nested inside of a P tag. There are sometimes you may decide you want to leave it as a list. It will flag a different error in some of common look, as well as some pack settings will flag depending upon the situation. So you could do an L body, and then you could definitely do a TD tag for our tables. And so that is the formatting we're looking for. I already showed some of the accessibility checker errors. So if it's that tagged annotation, that's just saying it's missing the OBJR in the tags tree. Again, Acrobat's not smart enough to tell you if you put it in the right spot. So you could have them all tagged, but they could be in the wrong spot, and Acrobat is not going to tell you. You might get this tab order failure, which I don't think this one had it yet, but it will be right here. And you actually just get to right click and there's an option to fix. So it's one of the easiest things, and it rearranges the tab order based on where you've put stuff into your tags tree. And then I just showed you how you can manually find a form. And then, of course, after you test all of your formatting and functions, you're going to want to clear your forms, which is important so that whoever gets your form gets a completely clean form. So that's under Prepare Forms. We have this clear form option. And so then it's going to take away all of the gibberish testing that you were doing. And then you do have to do all of your additional accessibility testing and screen reader testing as well. So it can be quite the multi-step. So I'm going to save this one while I have one. And I'm going to show you what it looks like if I auto tagged. So I may decide I want to auto tag this document. Now, since I've auto tagged it, it is not as upset about how many forms. So there's a few forms it didn't tag, but it tagged a majority of them. But that means that it also wiped my tags that I had. And so you'll see here, I no longer have an H1. Here, my list, it created the list. Honestly, I don't know where the forms they disappeared. They're not in there. So it didn't do a great job. And here it put today's date form in the wrong spot. Middle name it got right. So middle name it auto detected that formatting correctly. And then it is really helpful for tables. So I'm going to expand my table and it did put all of the forms for a table in the right spot. So I definitely lean towards auto tagging when there's a ton of forms or a lot of tables because it does do a really good job of I didn't have to manually add all these forms to the tables. I did post in chat the final version where I have made it accessible with the forms. So if you're curious what it looks like to have this completely accessible with forms, you can take a peek at that one for reference. So let me start JAWS and just test the form for a little bit, just to show you what JAWS is like with testing. Okay, so I'm going to start JAWS. I will be opening it in Reader and not Pro. So we're always doing our JAWS testing in Reader.
Context menu to navigate, press up or down. Adobe Acrobat, leaving menus, Chrome Legacy window, Webinar 06.23 forms, items view list box. Items view multi-select list box PDF remediation form field basics underline with instructions and forms underline ADA.
Okay, so I'm opening it up in Reader. I have JAWS going. I did open up one that is already somewhat completed. So some of the forms are already filled out. So you will hear part of that. And so I'm going to go through and I can do F.
Step 1: create source document for success checkbox checked.
So I did F for forms, so I can just jump from form to form. So there definitely are times where if you have a really intense document, you maybe are just going F, F, F to get to all the forms, but you're going to hear that it's going to read the tooltip and then tell us about how to interact with it. So I'm going to push F again and it's going to read the second check mark.
Step 2: convert to PDF checkbox checked.
So it's telling me checkbox checked.
Space to clear checkmark, press space bar, not checked.
And so then you use spacebar to select or deselect
space
it.
Checked. Space not checked.
And then it is a little more complicated to
Step 3:
interact with forms. That you can enter into a form or escape a form. So I'm going to go F and go to a text box.
Step 3: today's date left parent mm/dd/I right parent star required edit required 06/24/2026.
So this one is that today's date that's already filled out. If I wanted to edit it, I could push enter to get into it.
Today's date left parent mm/dd/I right parent star required edit 06/24/2026. Type in text.
And so it's telling me I can type in text. So I could change this.
6/2/5/2026.
And then I'm going to push escape to get out of
the
form.
Virtual PC cursor. First name star required edit.
And now I've gone to the next form. You can also use tab to get to the forms in addition to F. So I'm going to tab to the radio buttons for the M&Ms.
Will you prefer MMS left parent select 1 right parent peanut MMS radio button not checked 1 of 5. To change the selection press up or down arrow.
And so here I get to press my up and down arrows to change my selection.
Preferred MMS left parent select 1 right parent dark chocolate MMS radio button checked 2 of 5. To change the selection press up or down arrow.
And so I get to go around and decide which ones.
Preferred MMS left parent select 1. Right parent colon no MMS radio button checked.
And it is
5 of
saying
5.
M&M's,
To
kind of
change the
funny.
selection, press up or down arrow. Escape. Virtual PC.
If I was an avid M&M user, it was inside of a lot of my forms, I would maybe change it so that it would read M and M's instead of MM's. So that's kind of how you would interact. I'm obviously jumping to the forms to give you what JAWS looks like in it. Most users would probably start more like top to bottom. So I'm going to do a say all command. So it just reads everything that's there.
Heading level 2 preferred drink options left parent select all and apply. Right parent flavored sparkling water checkbox checked. Lemonade checkbox checked. Coca Cola checkbox checked. Pepsi checkbox checked. Heading level 2 rank your preferred volunteer schedule.
Okay. And the latest JAWS update, I'm sorry it got loud and went down, but it's a little quirk that has been happening where sometimes it just gets louder. So that's kind of the general what a screen reader would interact with our forms. And so it's really important that our tooltips are accurate so that someone can jump just from form to form. Or maybe they read all the forms, but they need to quickly go back and say, oh, just kidding, I don't want lemonade. Let me uncheck that. And so it's really important that the forms can also stand alone. You can also search the list of all the forms. And so the form tooltips are really important as well. Great. We have more webinars coming up. Our contact information is also available, so feel free to send us projects to our general inbox. That's documents@accessingenuity.com, or if you have any future presentations. And then we also have a feedback form. So if you have any advice for me today or want to give ideas on future presentations, that feedback form is a great place to do that. You can also sign up for our newsletters to be in the loop for future presentations. We are skipping our webinar for next week since the holiday is that week. So we have next week off. But on July 8th, I'll be back to talk about creating graphs and charts. So that's more for authors of documents, how to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success with charts and graphs. On July 15th, a coworker will be talking about JAWS and Excel. So if you want to see what JAWS is like inside of Excel. And then on the 22nd, I'll be talking about making Excel accessible. So more for authors of Excel documents. How are you going to set up your Excel file for success, and what are the limitations of accessibility within Excel? And then on the 29th, we're going to be showing one of our devices that we sell, the Topaz desktop magnifier. So we would love to have you join us for that. Thanks for everyone for coming, and hopefully you gleaned some new information and will be joining us in the future. Have a great rest of your day.